Ladies and gentlemen, Fraser, your first time on camera on TPS, I believe.
Indeed.
So thank you so much for doing this. Fraser has graciously agreed to produce this EP and to help me understand the process behind, getting a halfway decent sound. Obviously, I've never done this before, so this is, I've recorded with 8 tracks and things like that, really hands-on basic things, but I've never done anything that I've released to the world.
Yeah.
So this is all new to me. So thank you very much. So it's been drum day today. We've been able to come in today and record 4 tracks, drums, sort of bang them out. So when Doug and I did the demos, we started off using the Glyn Johns technique, right? Which is basically a kick drum and 2 overheads.
Yeah.
Right? But we haven't done that today.
No, we've gone for just a spaced pair of overheads.
As far as getting drums together for your recording, what are some important things that everyone's going to record drums should know?
Sure. So, it seems completely obvious, but to me, definitely when I first went to university, I completely missed this multiple times. So one, you need a great drummer.
Yes.
It goes without saying. It seems kind of stupid to mention it, but I'd say like so much of the drum sound is the way that the drummer's going to play. And so that's kind of essential before any mics. And then the next thing is obviously a good drum kit. Lucky here, Doug's bought some lovely little drums, which you've got a really great sound out of, despite they look pretty small, but they sound great. So that's
just to expand on that for a second. When we think of recording and producing drums, like certainly with modern technology, I think it's really easy to pass over just how important what is going into the machine. Just the quality of the tones that are going into the
entirely
machine.
And I think in sort of general, like with all the flexibility of sort of modern processes, modern equipment, so much emphasis is put on that now, because it's like I guess it's the same with guitar gear, you always want, say, a certain type of amp. It's the same with recording gear. You always want like the next best interface.
Okay. Oh yes, of course.
But
that's
of course,
recording rabbit holes.
Yeah. So it's the same thing, but sort of going back to basics, like you can have all those really great things, but unless you have a really great sound source, you're never going to be able to capture it well.
Yeah. It's just really fascinating to hear you say, well, actually, the first thing we've got to make sure is that the drums are tuned and they're sounding really good.
Yeah, entirely. And I mean, sort of today when Doug came in, set this up, we changed the snare sound a couple of times.
Yep.
But sort of the real key was Doug came in and he's sort of spent a lot of time with these drums. He's tuned them, spent a lot of time demoing the tracks, practicing the tracks, knowing exactly what sort of the way he's going to play, the way he wants the drums to sound, and by consequence plays them that way. And I think it sort of speaks volumes as well. The one thing we did change with the snare was like an extra drum skin on the top of the snare already, but it's I think Doug said he paid £20 for it, so it's like it's little things,
And there's tea towels.
We have tea towels on the toms. Again, I can't take credit for that. That's Doug's thing, sort of reminiscent of old Beatles techniques. But it's just sort of deaden the toms a bit to give them a little less sustain, and then because sort of with the lightest touch, doesn't quite take the high end out of them. Sounds great. Yeah, sounds really good.
Okay, so we've got a good sounding drum kit. We've got a drummer who knows the songs. Have you done sessions with drummers who are sort of flapping around, not really knowing stuff?
Yeah.
Does it make a big difference?
Entirely. And sort of it depends so much on the process. Today we had we've done it all in 6 hours or something like that. We tracked 4 songs in 6 hours with setup. So that's a really tight time schedule. If you have the luxury of having a day per song, then you can really get into it and start like, because it's the same with guitar, how you have that feedback loop of what you're hearing changes what you're playing.
Yep.
Exactly the same with recording.
Okay.
So you'll start playing the drums and then you'll listen back to the recording of it and be like, oh, actually, I'm really liking that sound. I want to play off that. So it's exactly the same thing. If you have more time, you can really get lost in the sounds, get lost in the mic techniques, and then the drum will start playing differently. But today, we had sort of a little less time. Plus, you'd done the pre-pro anyway, so.
When you hear us go on about guitar sounds, do you often go, actually, that applies to everything? Like
so much, yeah, so
right.
much so. So there's I'm a bassist, and definitely not a particularly good bassist. And I've always had a I really like pedals. I like sounds. That sort of stems from my love for recording.
Right.
So like just getting sounds is something I find really interesting, and the way you can create sounds. But yeah, so much of guitar gear and like. So you talk so much about gain staging.
Yes.
It's probably the most important thing in recording. So stuff like compressors, when you're hitting them at the front end, like how hard you're hitting your compressors,
right?
What sort of mic gain, how loud your preamp gain is will then affect sort of how much your compressor attacks. EQ, same when you shelve off the bottom end, so you get more clarity in the mix, that kind of thing. So much of it is exactly the same for recording, just applied slightly differently. Yeah.
So we're going to get into that when we do the production side. We'll start mixing everything and trying to get the sound. So what's going to happen now, I'm going to go back to my house and record as well as I can in my little room all the guitar sounds for this EP. There's a couple of things I want to do, a reamp of one of the solo one track that I just happened to snag. It's I want to keep that, but we'll work out a way to reamp that. Okay, so just to finish off the drums though, we've got so good sounding drums, good drummer. I mean, mics, what are the things to, you've got overhead mics here.
Yeah. So it's a really, really simple setup today. We've got how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mics on the drum kit. By no means is that like not enough or too much. You could, like Dan was saying, do Glyn Johns, have 3 mics in the drum kit, still get a great sound. Today, what we've gone for is we haven't gone for the Glyn Johns thing just because it's often quite difficult to get like a really tight snare sound on that, or at least I find it difficult.
Right. Okay.
There are people out there who will religiously use Glyn Johns and make it sound fantastic.
Right.
So it's the same with.
But that's a sound
amps.
unto itself, isn't it? That has it has its own vibe.
Yeah. So you sort of end up, if you think you're looking over the drum kit with Glyn Johns, you sort of have the drum kit and you make it really wide.
Okay.
So you end up with your toms, because you have a mic over the toms and then a mic by the low tom. Those end up being panned hard left and right.
Okay.
So you get a really wide picture of the drum kit.
Right. But this setup gives us a lot more control.
Yeah. So with the Glyn Johns technique, that's kind of creating an overall picture of the drums.
Right.
With this, I'm using the overheads just almost as like a sort of like a cymbal thing.
Okay.
So we've got a kick mic, we've got a snare mic on the high tom, mic on the low tom, hi-hat, and then the overheads. For the kick, we've just got the one mic, purely because Doug's kick drum doesn't have a hole in it. So, and if I just sort of spent a moment putting my ear around the kick drum, the middle of it seemed to have the most low end.
So you're looking for the most low end for the position of the mic,
or just wherever you think it sounds good. I know
Right.
it sounds completely like obvious, but putting your ear against something and hearing where it sounds best is probably where it will sound best.
Okay.
So yeah, just point and shoot with that.
For someone who's never done this before, I mean, it's fascinating. Who's watching you, work out where you put the mic and thinking, what's he listening for? It's just like, it just sounds good here.
Yeah,
Put it here.
quite literally. And if it will definitely sound better than where it sounds bad.
So that's great. Now, overheads are like different heights.
Yeah.
What's this do?
So yes, we've got spaced overheads. The idea behind this is they're kind of acting like a picture of the drum kit. I'm using them more for cymbals. They're spaced to give you a spread. The sort of spacing between the mics dictates how wide the drum kit will sound when it's recorded.
Right.
So if you had the mics really close together, you're going to end up with quite a narrow drum kit.
Okay.
As you start to move them further apart, you're going to end up with a wider drum kit.
And how do you pan them?
So it's going to sound very cliche, but with your ears. So
okay.
Yeah, so sort of spacing of microphones in general. You're looking at creating an image. So when you listen to something, it might sound like your drums are right down the middle, or it might sound like they're a little bit wide, or it might sound like they're really wide.
Okay.
So to achieve that is a combination of both panning and mic position.
Right.
So for these, I've spaced them such that I think they're going to be sort of fairly wide, and we want them to sound sort of quite big. So I've spaced them like that and then panned them pretty wide as well. But you could also space them even wider, and then you'll end up with like really incoherent cymbal sounds. You end up with like a cymbal that's way left and a crash that's way right.
Right. Okay.
So this is kind of like a pretty normal kind of picture.
Right.
And then the difference in height is to do with the phase relationships between the mics and the snare drum.
Oh wow. Okay.
So the idea, I mean, whether it's strict science, I'm not too sure, but it always seems to work, and a lot of people do it, is measuring from the center of the snare to each overhead, and then using that to position the height of the microphones.
Okay, so because the overheads are picking up everything, right? We're not recording cymbals in isolation.
No.
So, and I guess because the snare is the most constant thing, that if it is out of phase, then it's going to be really difficult to get rid of that.
Yeah. Entirely. It's like so you know how you talk about running amps in wet dry.
Yeah.
Like exactly the same thing. You end up with.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So yes, the idea behind this is that if your overheads are out of phase with your snare drum, you're going to find it really difficult to get a consistent sound when you're balancing your microphones.
Okay.
So if, say, the left is out of phase, as you turn your left overhead up, the sound of your snare is going to change because the phase relationship
yes, of
changes.
course. Amazing. Okay, so one last thing to point out. So we're at the TPS studio, but it's not a recording studio. This is just a room, right?
Yeah.
So we're not, the sounds we're producing here are not from being in some high-end, tuned, fancy. It's just a room with mics going into an interface. I mean, a very good interface, to be fair. But, we are essentially just in a room doing this.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely worth pointing out that, obviously we're very lucky to have the UAD interfaces, and they are fantastic.
You could have the best gear in the world, but if you don't know what you're doing with this, it doesn't matter.
Completely. And so this is so important. And it's sort of and like you were saying earlier, we're in the TPS studio, which isn't necessarily a studio really. It's a video room where you have your pedals.
We're in a barn with some black cloth
exactly.
and some wood panels.
And some wood panels. So by no means is this necessarily an ideal tracking space. But as sort of consequently, I've chosen to mic quite closely to the drum kit.
Right.
And what I think sort of we've realised after today is you can achieve a great deal with a relatively sort of simple setup in a room that's not necessarily a drum room.
Yep.
Just if you do a sort of you're careful with your mic placements. Check you've got like a great drummer. Make sure you're happy with your drum kit sound in the room. If you stick some mics on it and get some nice reverb on it, it will sort of translate to a relatively professional sounding drum recording.
Well, here's hope.
Well, hopefully.
Here's hope.
Yeah.
All right, mate, thank you so much. So the next step will be tracking guitars and doing vocals, and then we'll bring it all in and throw it all at you and say, help.
Yeah.
But it's been fascinating today. Just hearing, getting all this right, and just sat in front of the monitors going, actually, this is really cool. That sounds great. Okay. Next step, guitars. Thanks, mate. Cheers, guys. Take it easy. We'll see you soon. Bye.